So if that's what you signed up for, you're in the right place. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining. Feel free to say hi in the chat. Let us know, who you are, name, pronouns, where you're joining from, what's on your heart, anything that you want to share. Um, so quick tech check-in. This is a webinar. So the features that are enabled include both the chat. You should be able to say hi in the chat. There we go. Hi, Minnesota. Glad y'all are here. And the chat is going to be used for vibes, sharing with each other, connecting with each other, sharing reactions, etc. And then we're going to drop our questions in the Q&A section. That way, it'll be a lot easier for us to track and make sure that we're responding to questions as they come up. Hi, Texas. See Texas in the house, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Califas. Okay. Oh, it's going too fast. Welcome, everybody. If you're just joining us, this is part one of the mass training for women's safety teams with Nonviolent Peaceforce. I'm Amanda Chavez Barnes. I'm Senior Director of Programs at Women's March, and we are here tonight to talk about how do we keep each other safe. Quick tech check-in. This is a webinar, so that means that if you're a participant, your camera is not on and you're automatically muted. So don't worry, we can't see you, we can't hear you. Feel free to do your thing as you follow along on this training. But we can see you in the chat, so please feel free to say hi in the chat. Let us know your name, pronouns, where you're joining from, whatever is on your heart, whatever you'd like to share with us. We're really glad that you're taking time and are honored that, you could be anywhere in the world this evening, but you're here with us. So another thing that I wanted to just mention really quickly is that if you have accessibility needs for captioning, there is a live caption button on the bottom of underneath my video here. You should be able to click on that, and then the live captions will appear on your screen. So we are gathering here tonight for this mass training, knowing that we are currently in a context of escalating political violence, right? We know that we have seen activists being doxxed and harassed. We have seen infiltration of our networks. We've seen that post that went viral of the sheriff in Ohio who is asking neighbors to snitch on each other if they had, a political sign in their yard, and so many other things. We've talked to many of you who've shared that, you want to be engaged, but you feel nervous, you feel scared for your own safety. And we know that we at Women's March have also experienced that firsthand. But we also know that our greatest form of safety comes in connection and in community with each other. We know that we will keep us safe and protect each other, and that we got us. And we're so grateful to be joined by our friends and colleagues at Nonviolent Peaceforce. We're going to walk us through a training tonight and on Thursday night to help us learn some concrete skills to respond and directly disrupt violence or harm. So tonight, we will go ahead and do the first part of this training, and then we're going to meet back again on Thursday night, same place, same time, and have the second part of the training. And we will also, at that time, invite you into community by sharing a Slack space with you so that those of y'all who want to do this work and create women's protection teams in the US can be in community with each other as we work to, disrupt harm in our communities. And so I just wanted to share a little bit about the organization that is going to be leading this training for us tonight before I hand you over to them. Nonviolent Peaceforce's mission is to protect civilians in violent conflicts through unarmed strategies, build peace side by side with local communities, and advocate for the wider adoption of these approaches to safeguard human lives and dignity. So with that, we're very grateful for Nonviolent Peaceforce, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to them to walk us through this training.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda. And thank you, everyone, for making time to learn together and to build safety side by side. My name is Kalayan Mendoza. I'm the Director of Mutual Protection with Nonviolent Peaceforce. We've been around for over 2 decades, and we have program sites from South Brooklyn to South Sudan. We're really lucky to have one of our colleagues from Cotabato City in the southern part of the Philippines in Mindanao, Denise Caderniga, joining us. And I just wanted to invite Denise to share just like some brief information on our work in the Philippines. Denise?
Thanks, Kalayaan. Nonviolent Peace Force in the Philippines was formally launched in 2007 by invitation of various civil society organizations after 2 years of sustained presence in the country, having secured recognition and acceptance from almost of all the stakeholders in Mindanao peace process because of its non-partisanship. Nonviolent Peace Force was the first international NGO invited to join international monitoring team in 2009. So our work in the Philippines focuses on monitoring ceasefire violation or civilian protection. We use early warning and early response as application. As context change, this also transitions from traditional ceasefire monitoring into more on civilian protection issues, uh, including um, gender gender-based violence, early child marriage, and violent extremism. Um, the capacity development continues up to now. However, today, capacity building is focused on system strengthening, systems that are expected to reinforce civilian protection, like training with the police, women police, development of police guidance note, training women ex competence as social workers who are monitoring and responding to gender-based violent issues, and training military officials to ensure that the communities are protected. Lastly, under advocacy, we have different levels of advocacy systems, policies, and social behavioral change at the grassroots level. Um, yeah, so that's what basically what we do in the Philippines.
Thank you so much, Denise. So we'll just go ahead and we're going to be sharing several tools that we use at Nonviolent Peace Force that is grounded in what we call unarmed civilian protection. Whether it is in uh, Ukraine, Myanmar, Iraq, South Sudan, the Philippines, we utilize a set of tools and set of tools and methodologies that are grounded in nonviolence, nonpartisanship, and centering those most directly affected by violence. One of the things that, and I'm really glad that Amanda talked about this, one thing that we've seen over and over is that community is truly what keeps us safe. When we talk about building safety side by side with communities on the front lines of violence, we really talk about uplifting um, lived experiences and ancestral technologies that have kept our communities safe and alive from colonization, occupation, and genocide for generations. Before we officially jump into the training, I want to just take a moment to invite folks to go ahead and grab a sheet of paper, a notebook, and I wanted to introduce a tool that we use on the ground called the Holistic Check-In. This is a tool that we have used. Really, we built it in Ferguson during the uprisings following the murder of Michael Brown, exactly like 10 years ago uh, this year. And what it essentially is a set of 4 questions that helps to reinforce and support one's agency and autonomy when it has been momentarily taken from them by state or non-state actor violence. So I'd like to invite you to feel free to write down your answers. And everyone who has registered will be getting a copy of the deck. So if you're not able to write everything down quickly, that's totally okay. So the questions are, what are you feeling physically right now? What are you feeling emotionally or psychosocially right now? What are you feeling energetically right now? And what does support look like for you right now? These questions may seem basic, but when we are attacked or are survivors of violence, we have our agency and autonomy momentarily taken from us. This helps us to get back into our bodies, to recognize that we have specific needs, to know what is going on, and to name those needs. So we're going to be going over two primary frameworks. One is a threat assessment, and the other is a capacity map. A threat assessment is made of two elements or two tools. What it is, in essence, is a framework to help you identify and address threats. Why would we use it? By preparing for likely threats, you decrease their likelihood or minimize their impact. I want to take a moment and recognize that the moment that we're in, the world that we're in, the violence that we're seeing all around us, none of this is normal. And none of this should be, we should never accept it. And along with that, part of keeping our community safe is preparing. For those of you that live in the areas that were affected by Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton, for those of you that have been affected by California wildfires, you know that you may not be able to necessarily control the disaster, but what you can do and what you have the ability to do is to prepare for them in the ways that you need. Building a threat assessment is really step one in that process. The times we would create a threat assessment, especially for around political violence, is it's really done in preparation and when threats are on the horizon. I'll share a few examples of when we've used a threat analysis, but in essence, it's a forecasting tool used in unarmed civilian protection that helps you to identify threats to yourself or your communities, recognize the harm inherent in those threats, and articulate the gaps that make the harm more likely, and brainstorm the resources you have and the resources you need to minimize the impact of that harm. In the image below, there is in the foreground, a person that in an indigenous water protector sitting on top of a horse. This was taken at Standing Rock in 2016 during Thanksgiving, when the Morgan County Sheriff's Department, who you see on the top of the hill, which is also a Dakota, Lakota, Nakota burial site, they started using freezing water, tear gas, and pepper spray against peaceful water protectors. So this is a example of when you would use a threat analysis and how you would basically use it in real time by taking stock of what's happening. What is a threat on the horizon? What are the risks or harms to you or your community? What are the vulnerabilities or the things that make it more likely for that harm to impact you? And what are the capacities you have and what are the ones that you need? We'll break that down in just a few more slides. But I wanted to just give this graphic example, running out of English today, of a threat assessment. So during Pride here in New York City, the weather is all over the place. Sometimes there will be clouds on the horizon. So the threat is the clouds on the horizon. This is a source indicator of potential harm. The risk is getting wet, which is a harm to myself. The vulnerability is usually during Pride. I'm out in booty shorts and a little tiny shirt, and I can get drenched or sick or anything else by the rain, which stems from the threat of clouds on the horizon. So capacities that I have access to is there are buildings with awnings, and a capacity or a strength that I would need in order to minimize that harm would be an umbrella, which I don't have. So by being able to name what the threat is, what the risk or the harm is, and the vulnerabilities and capacities are foundational to understanding and building out a threat assessment. So breaking it down, a threat is the source, indicators, or declarations of harm or violence. Risks are specific harms or violence. Vulnerabilities can be thought of as gaps, things that make harm or violence more likely or more damaging. And capacities are resources, strengths you have and strengths that you need. When building a threat assessment, you can utilize it in a multitude of different scenarios, whether that is planning for potential climate catastrophe, whether that is planning for political violence, whether you are in all the way by yourself in a smaller state, or whether you're in a metropolitan area. Threat assessments are one way for us to reclaim our agency and autonomy in a world racked with violence. So when you really break it down, a threat is understanding who or what is a source, indicator, or declaration of harm or violence. The risk is what is a specific form of harm or violence that originates from that threat. Vulnerabilities are what factors make it more likely for that violence to happen. And capacities are what does your group need, or what do you or your group need and have to strengthen vulnerabilities to lessen impact. So let's build that together. So once again, I'd like to invite for folks to go ahead and grab a piece of paper or a notebook. I'll give it just a couple moments while I take a sip of tea. So what I'd like to invite for folks to do is to take a moment to think about threats that have arisen in the past against you, your pod, your group, your community when doing this work. I'll use an example just to support folks in as we move through this. So an example is white supremacists have left threatening comments on your group's socials saying that they will attack your next Women's March action. So that is a threat. The source of the threat is our white supremacists. They have left comments, so basically a trail of information, data points, evidence, and have directed it towards you, your pod, and your group. So we move from threat to identifying the risk, or what is the specific and likely harms to your community that originates from the threat. If it's helpful to think about this in terms of as an individual or as a pod or as a community, I invite you to do that. So identify one likely risk or harm from that threat. So in the threat example I shared earlier, Women's March participants have been followed back to their cars, at previous actions by white supremacists, and there's a high likelihood that this will happen again. So that is a risk or a harm that's directly connected to the threat. The vulnerabilities are factors that make it more likely for that risk or harm to happen or increase its impact. So list one vulnerability you, your group, or your community has when it comes to the threat that you've identified. So as I shared earlier, there has been a threat made by white supremacists saying they're going to attack the next Women's March action. The risk, the likely risk is that there have been participants who have been followed back to their cars after a Women's March action. And a vulnerability is people returning to their cars from an action are not accompanied. How many times have we, left a protest by ourselves or left an action by ourselves and gone back to our car? It's really important that when we're engaging in social justice work, human rights work, to always have someone supporting you. So a vulnerability is that people are returning to their cars from an action unaccompanied. So we talked about threats, risks, vulnerabilities, and now capacities. What are the resources or strengths does your organization have and need to make the risks less likely or impactful? So you want to list one capacity you have and one capacity you need. So an example based on what I had outlined earlier is a capacity that myself and my pod have is that we have fierce community members committed to safety. A capacity that we need are more members trained and supported to be part of women's protection teams. So we'll take a few moments focused on building out one capacity you have and one capacity you need. And just a note, folks asking questions, if any of them do not get answered in the chat, the Nonviolent Peaceforce team will be collecting them and we'll be sharing them in a follow-up email with everyone that has registered, along with this slide deck and accompanying resources. So we moved through identifying our threats, identifying those risks, naming vulnerabilities, and building out capacities. Something integral to this work is looking at it from a place of abundance. When we do any kind of safety work, it is very, very normal for one to feel overwhelmed, for one to feel that I don't have what I need. But I want to invite you to think about all of the times that you have cared for yourself and others in situations when safety was not guaranteed. Each of us have a story, whether we have intervened from someone getting harassed or protected thousands of people at a protest that were targeted by the state or non-state actors. In this work, capacity mapping is fundamental to really understanding the resources that we have and those that we need to either identify or build. So capacity mapping is based on your threat assessment. What are the capacities and strengths you have and what are the ones that you need? When you build out your capacity map, you're really trying to understand your threats, identify your resources, and build upon your strengths. During the November 2020 in New York City, there were multiple threats made against Black organizers, most especially Black trans organizers, by Proud Boys and other white supremacist groups. And myself and other folks on different safety teams came together to build up our capacity, the capacity that we needed, which were book shields. These were going to be used to protect us from projectiles, from getting bottles thrown at us. So we understood that our threats were coming from white supremacists that were leaving hateful comments all over our socials, finding out our information, doxing some of us. Doxing is when your personal information is released online and you're targeted because of your work or the perception of your political alignment. So we understood that threats to our communities, most especially to our Black trans siblings, were physical attacks. The resources that we had identified were that we had badass women and femmes that knew how to build book shields. And the way that we built upon our strengths was by inviting community members who wanted to show up for our Black trans siblings on the ground at actions and to protect them. when we had identified our threats, we knew that we needed to come up with a capacity that was not one that matched their violence, but rather protected us from violence. When we identified the resources we have, some of that was we had women and femmes who knew how to build these book shields. We had a community center that was kind enough to donate the materials for those book shields. And we needed more people to carry these book shields. These were essentially shields that were made with plexiglass, foam board, uh, uh, a wool blanket, and zip ties. So in the image, the three images, uh, you see we have a group of people who are masked and are have a book shield between them. The second image are two women and femmes, API women and femmes, who are building a book shield. And the third image are of a group of uh, API and other BIPOC women and femmes and other folks who have become Team Bookshield. So that was just like one example of how we had identified what the threat was, um, uh, named the risk, the vulnerabilities and capacities. What I'd like us to do as a collective, or if you want to do this individually, obviously, feel free to, is we're going to build out our capacity map. So what I'd like to invite you to do is on your piece of paper is to just feel free to draw out a table or just a list where you name the vulnerability that you had built earlier. So the vulnerability that I had identified was that people are being followed to their cars after Women's March actions when they're by themselves. So I had to think about what is a capacity that I have if I were an organizer. Our pod has experienced and committed members. That is a integral capacity and strength in this work. And a capacity that we needed was to have a women's protection team training, which we're actually going to have in a couple days. So let's take a few moments to just go ahead and build out our capacity map utilizing the vulnerability that you had named, a capacity that you have, and a capacity that you need. We'll give it a few more moments. And for the folks that may have joined a little bit afterwards, we will be sharing this deck and accompanying resources, along with any questions that may not have been answered in a follow-up email tomorrow. So what I'd like to do is invite folks in the chat to drop in the capacities that they have and capacities that they need. Um, Once again, please feel free to drop in the chat capacities that you have and capacities that you need, just as a way to help others maybe visualize or brainstorm their capacities. I'm going to see if I could check out the Q. Oh no, I can't check out the Q&A from my um So once again, just want to invite folks to go ahead and drop any capacities that you have and capacities that you need. Thank you. Capacities, others nearby need others train in peaceful altercations. Capacity first aid training. That's a great one. It's important to determine if those on if law enforcement is side at least. And we have an entire training on de-escalation and intervention, but really we're introducing an overall framework on starting your safety planning, utilizing the threat assessment um, uh, uh, framework. A de-escalation experience, we're a small group of activists, need more active members who are trained de-escalation. I'll make sure, NP, if we can include resources on de-escalation, we have a ton of those resources as well. Some of the work that we have done in New York in the last 3 years, has been around anti-Asian violence and supporting community members, predominantly women and elders, to protect themselves from potential anti-Asian attacks. So we'll definitely include those capacities that they have, a large number in group during sine wave, need reliable communications. Fantastic. Capacity, people with ability to secure funding to improve building security. That is a fantastic capacity. Vulnerabilities, throwing bottles, being tripped, shouted at. Definitely. Capacities that they have is locks in security system. Capacities needed, de-escalation, self-control and response, and do not engage. Definitely, we do trainings also for one to identify their, when they're in their window of tolerance, when you're cool, calm, collected, and connected. When you are pushed outside of your window of tolerance, what are your activation points, otherwise known as trigger points? Identifying your survival tools, like your anchor points. What are the things that keep us within our window of tolerance when we're cool, calm, collected, and connected? We'll include some of those workbooks and resources as well. So thank you everyone for dropping their capacities in the chat. I wanted to take a moment to talk about pod mapping. This was created by Mia Mingus and the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective. Pod mapping, in essence, is identifying people within your sphere who you would be able to support and get support from. This really took off at the beginning of this pandemic that we're currently in. By Mia Mingus, by Alice Wong, and other API disabled women and femmes who are building out capacities in their community to keep themselves and others safe. This was also utilized in 2019 during the California wildfires, and we'll include a link to the building out a capacity map. But for those of you that may be solo in your respective area, whether you're in Jackson Heights, Queens, or in Eureka, Northern California. Pod mapping might be your first step in your own capacity map. So if you can, if you look at the image in front of you, I'll give a quick visual description. In the middle is a fierce, radiant Black trans leader by the name of Raquel Willis, who has an amazing book out. And you want to create your pod map with you in the middle. And if Raquel were to create a pod map to build her own safety when it comes to organizing a protest or an action, she might think about who are the people in my life who either has experience or knows how to build safety. So Raquel will know LJ, will know Kosti, will know Jess. And these are folks that have a relationship with Raquel and resources and experiences that can support Raquel in her safety plan. The folks that are connected to LJ, Kosti, or Jess, the folks that are directly connected to Raquel, are part of that pod map as well. Who do they then bring in to ensure the safety of Raquel? So when we look at building out our capacity map or pod map, we want to think of our community as a strength. Who are the folks both in person and virtually that we can rely upon? One of the areas of work that we have been building at Nonviolent Peaceforce is called digital unarmed civilian protection. In essence, it's really based off of the work of Alice Wong and Mia Mingus, in that it is a way for folks that may not be able to be there physically, whether it's on the ground at a protest or directly in your on your block or in your neighborhood. But these are folks that you have relationships with. And these are folks that can also provide safety by checking in with you. How many of us have gone to a protest by ourselves and not had someone to hold space for us afterwards? That can put a lot of strain and stress on our entire system. And just having someone hold space and reflecting back the holistic check-in is one way to build out your pod map that's connected to digital unarmed civilian protection. You don't need people to be physically there in order to be part of your pod. They can be virtual as long as you have a relationship with them and a trusted relationship grounded in safety and solidarity. So for those of you that may be wondering, okay, so I want to build up my pod map. I'm in an area where I don't really know everyone in my community. What is the first step that I can do when trying to organize or build safety in my community? Well, firstly, every single person can agree that safety is a priority. What that looks like and how that's enacted looks different in different communities and along the spectrum. What I wanted to offer as a tool is what's called the Spectrum of Allies, which was created by Training for Change. When you're organizing, you usually can tell where on the spectrum of allies someone lies in. And what I have counseled folks when building out their safety teams is to look, and you're looking in your town, your province, your state, to build out your safety team or to build out your pod, is to find folks that are at the very least on the neutral to passive allies mark. So what could that look like? So if I had if I have neighbors that I'm trying to organize or to get on my safety team, even if it's a community safety team to prepare for possible flooding, I want to find folks who may be neutral or passive in terms of their alignment with what I want to do. You're not necessarily going to go to active people that are actively opposing you or people that are completely on the other side of the political spectrum. You want to find folks that are neutral or passive. The reason being is you want to protect your energy. When doing any kind of organizing, you want to build power with as many people as possible. That includes within the realm of building up women's protection teams or just safety teams in general. So you want to take a look at when you're doing an audit or trying to build out your pod map, who are the folks that I know that I have a relationship with, that I'm able to support and they're able to support me, that may be neutral or passive. And the reason that we think about this is when we are doing capacity mapping, sometimes we see uh, not abundance, scarcity. But when we extend out our vision a little bit larger, we're able to say, okay, my neighbor who I don't know what how they identify or how they vote, but we have a pretty good relationship. They've taken care of my plants when I needed to, and I've taken care of their cat. So that would be like a neutral to passive ally. So when we're thinking about building out our pods or building out our teams, um, focus on the folks that are neutral or passive in order to start building. Obviously, you're going to be finding active allies and folks in your life that you're already aligned with, that want to build safety alongside with you, that want to, they may be folks that are already organizing with you. But just a pro tip, when engaging in this work, look at neutral to passive in order to get them to be active. So we went over building out our threat assessment. Who or what is a source, indicator, or declaration of harm or violence? We identified the risks. What is a specific form or of harm or violence that originates from the threat? We talked about vulnerabilities, which are the factors that make it more likely for violence to happen and impact you. And capacities, what does your group need or have to strengthen their vulnerabilities to lessen impact? So I want to take a 3-minute bio break for folks to step away, for folks to uh, go ahead and grab some water. Maybe you want to stretch, and while we'll come back at 8:46 Eastern. So 3-minute bio break, and I'll answer questions in the Q&A as I can. NP folks, if folks can go ahead and grab some of the questions, I can't access them while I'm in this mode. Thank you. And 2 more minutes for our bio break. Alrighty, as we gently come back into the space, I just wanted to share this quote by one of my guiding constellations, the philosopher, the organizer, the activist, uh, Grace Lee Boggs. The only way to survive is by taking care of one another. As succinct and as simple as that is, it's key to the work that we do at Nonviolent Peaceforce and the work that all of y'all are doing. So what we're now going to do is going over a risk grid. A risk grid is basically outlining the probability and impact of to help guide your work when you're building out your threat assessment. So what I wanted to invite for folks to do is to create a risk grid on their paper. On the x-axis, you'll have your probabilities, so high probability, low probability. On the y-axis, you'll have low impact, high impact. So if I were to build a risk grid to identify what is most likely, because it's really, it's quite normal for folks to think about all of the risks that might come up. So this is one way to help manage that anxiety, very real anxiety, to put it in a way of like, what do I actually need to focus my energies on? For instance, a risk that I was thinking about was an Instagram smear campaign by white supremacists. It would be pretty low impact-ish and not a high probability, but it's still probable. Um, a a risk that would be in the low probability and somewhat high impact would be if there was a call for boycotts of places that myself and my pod or my group would organize, or maybe where we work. If you look at the quadrant with high probability, high impact, two risks that I had identified was doxing organizers and physical violence during a local Women's March action. So what I want to invite you to do is to take a moment and to place your risk or the harm that you had identified in the risk grid. Is it highly probable? Is there a low probability of it happening? Is there low impact? Is there high impact? Would it not really impact you or your community, or would it immediately impact you and your community in egregious ways? So one might ask, how do I even start to assess this? I wanted to just share some of the monitoring groups that I use on a daily basis for my monitoring evaluation and analysis dashboard. The first one is ACLID US Crisis Monitor. ACLID is an armed conflict monitor, and it has a page specifically looking at the US. The Gun Violence Archive uh, identifies and documents gun violence in the United States on a daily. So you can get information about your state, different forms of gun violence, how many mass shootings we've had in a year. Political Research Associates is a research and monitoring organization that have identified specific white supremacist groups and other bad actors that are either have attacked or in the process of organizing attacks against marginalized communities. And then lastly, mapping police violence. When we're thinking about the calculus of our threat assessment, for many communities, the police are a threat. Just a few weeks ago, a Korean American woman by the name of Victoria Lee had a mental health crisis where the police were called in and uh, uh, had murdered her rather than helping. So when we look at identifying our risks and what is most likely, it's important to have multiple data points to be able to build that from. We'll be including a list of these in the follow-up email as well. So if you're thinking about, okay, so I really need to analyze my risk. I need to be able to name my threats, vulnerabilities, and capacities. This is going to be included in the deck as well. So you're going to be outlining what your threats are, what are the source of those threats, why are they threatening you or other vulnerable folks. You're looking at vulnerabilities, who's vulnerable and why, and capacities. What are the capacities that you need, and what are the ones that you have? So we very briefly went over building out a threat assessment and a capacity map. The threat assessment was broken down into your threat, risks, vulnerabilities, and capacities. We had built out a risk grid identifying an area of high probability, areas of low probability, areas of low impact and high impact. And we placed our specific risks in the risk grid to be able to zero in on what we need to focus our energies on. We also did a capacity map where we had pulled a vulnerability from our threat analysis and created a capacity that we have and a capacity that we need. We also talked about building out a pod map, which we'll be sharing that resource from Mia Mingus and the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective. So that was a lot of information in a short amount of time. I just want to say that we should not even have to be doing these kind of trainings. I've been doing this work since 99, and it has impressed upon me the fact that the only thing that truly keeps us safe is community, whether that is safe from the violence of the state or non-state actors, whether that's safety from climate disaster. Community is always who shows up. I hope everyone here is able to build community both virtually and in person. I hope everyone here is able to hold space for yourself and others as you're doing this work. And we shouldn't have to do this. We shouldn't have to organize for our human rights. We shouldn't have to build out threat assessments to protect us and our communities. But that is a reality that we're in. And by you being able to take on this labor and this work helps our communities who are not able um, to have this as an offering to keep ourselves and one another safe. My name is Kalyan Mendoza with Nonviolent Peaceforce. My pronouns are he or they, them, and I'd like to hand this back to Amanda.
Thank you so much, Kalyan. We appreciate you and the whole Nonviolent Peaceforce team for bringing us this really needed training. Thank you so much to everyone for engaging. And if you do have any questions that you wanted to, last minute questions that you wanted to add, please go ahead and drop them in the Q&A. The Nonviolent Peaceforce team has a running document that they're keeping. And so we will see you back here, same place, same time on Thursday. Thank you so much. Bye. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.